Okay, so he was not the frontiersman. That was John Kinsey Clark, who sometimes delivered goods on horseback into Deerfield and eventually moved there and is buried in the local cemetery. Sauganash actually is a very interesting character in Chicago history. This was a man otherwise known as Billy Caldwell. He was a Native American chief. He was the son of a European father and a Native American mother. And he was another one of these Native Americans who helped to negotiate the treaties that ultimately banished his people west of the Mississippi. And as with Archange, in recognition for his efforts, the federal government gave him a huge tract of land along the north branch of the Chicago River. It's along the Edens today, and that property is by Caldwell Avenue, and that's where you find Caldwell Woods Forest Preserve and Caldwell Golf Course and the Chicago neighborhood of Sauganash. Now, why was that put there? Well, it's because there was something called the Indian Boundary Line. And this was a line that ran parallel north and south to this canal that was created to connect the Lake Michigan, the Great Lakes to the Mississippi. And this is what brought settlement into this whole region. And the white settlers didn't want Native Americans anywhere near that canal. So they created this Indian Boundary Line. And if you follow that Indian Boundary Line, which is today Forest Preserve Drive and that little diagonal Rogers Avenue up in Rogers Park, if you put a ruler down on a map, where you hit the Chicago River North Branch, that's right where Billy Caldwell's property was. So he had to be outside the Indian Boundary Line, just like Archange had to be up here in Wilmette, outside the Indian Boundary Line. Or if you go up the Des Plaines River over by O'Hare, you'll find Robinson Woods. Robinson Woods is right north of the Indian Boundary Line, and it's named for Alexander Robinson, who his Native American name was Chichipinque, and he was another one of those Native Americans who helped negotiate the treaty that banished the rest of his people west of the Mississippi. So you have these very interesting archaeological remains of this history. So Sheridan was a Civil War general. He was living in Chicago when the Great Fire broke out in 1871. Fearing civil unrest, the mayor declared martial law and put Sheridan in charge. Sheridan also coordinated relief efforts after the fire, and of course Fort Sheridan is named for him. He was a Civil War general and West Point grad, and he's remembered for his ruthless campaign against Native Americans after the war. It's another interesting urban myth about Sheridan Road. You may have heard that Sheridan Road was originally designated as a military highway to take soldiers from Fort Sheridan down to the armories in Chicago to put down labor rebellions. The truth is that these armories were built in Chicago and in other cities around the time of the Haymarket riots for that purpose, for soldiers to come into our cities and put down labor revolts. One of those armories is now where the Museum of Contemporary Art is in Chicago. Another one is Oprah Winfrey's studio. But the people who developed Sheridan Road actually were imagining it as kind of another lakeshore drive. They wanted it to run up the lakeshore. And they actually went to the Secretary of the Army and made this case that you needed a military highway to go from Fort Sheridan down to the city. The Secretary of the Army didn't buy it. And that's why Sheridan Road sort of instead makes this circuitous route through the lagoons. And by the way, when you think about Billy Caldwell and Archange Wilmette, it is worth a reminder that the Native Americans really got a raw deal. According to the treaties, the U.S. government paid them 14.5 cents an acre. They then turned around and sold it to settlers for $1.25 an acre. And even at that amazing bargain basement price, by today's standard, the government was making an 800% profit on the land that they had, that the Indians had ceded to them. So finally, we're in Northfield, and I'll conclude with a little bit of about this community. We had wanted to include Northfield in our North Shore show, and we tried in vain to get permission to shoot. Apparently, according to my researcher, Susan Godfrey, who knows Susie Godfrey out there? Some of you do. My researcher, Susie Godfrey, you have to tell me if I'm remembering this correctly. There's apparently an old North Shore Line sign, like from a train station, somewhere in Northfield. Maybe in the village hall or something. Yeah. They wouldn't let us in there to shoot it. So unfortunately Northfield ended up on the cutting room floor. But here's what I wrote about Northfield. Maybe they read the script and that's why they didn't want us in the show. Here's what I wrote. Most people would hate having a swamp for a backyard, but the people in what is now Northfield loved it. They foraged for hay and grew horseradish. These were crops that wouldn't spoil on the long wagon trip into Chicago. Samuel Insull, as I told you, transformed Northfield. He developed the land along the Skokie Valley Electric Line. Insull wanted the name of the town to be Wabun, after the famous Potawatomi chief, but the locals just called their area Skokie Swamp. Not real good for real estate. So Insull held a contest to name the town, and mysteriously, Wabun won. 2 years later, on an inspection tour, Insull noticed that someone had changed the word "wa" at the train station to "hot," spelling "hot bun." That's when he ordered his real estate man to come up with a new name, and he came up with Northfield. And I believe my source for this was a woman named Arlen Lieber Presser, who's a local author and has written a number of those Arcadia history books. Are you here by any chance tonight? The Encyclopedia of Chicago actually tells a slightly different story, but I like Arlene's story much better. So thank you very much. I hope I lived up to all the billing. It's a little daunting, but I really appreciate Should we open the floor for, okay, do I need the moderator to open the floor for questions? Okay, hold up your green. Now, you can only ask me a question if you have a green card. No, that's not true. I think we have a couple of minutes for questions before we can get back to the real business of democracy. Yes?
How did the Potawatomi Indians regain the land that they now have the casino on?
How did the Potawatomi regain the land that they have the casino on? I am not I play a historian on TV, but I'm not an expert in this. I believe that because they somehow legally are, you may know better than I, are considered a nation, they are not bound by the same laws that prevent gambling. I don't know if the casinos have to be on like Indian reservation land, or just by virtue of being Potawatomi or any other Native American, you're allowed to open a gambling casino, but I believe that's the reason why. Yes?
Years ago, I was driving through Scotland, and I came across Glencoe, a small rural village, and I wondered if there was any relationship, and I wondered, therefore, if the last name Coe is also Scottish.
I don't know about whether the last name Coe is Scottish. It sounds like it might be. But there are a number of different stories about where Glencoe got its name. I told you one of them, which is that Matthew Coe. There is another story that, I don't know if it was Coe or some other settler, named Glencoe for his home back in Scotland or one of the British, one of the countries in Great Britain. But that is another one of those stories. Yes?
Jeff, was Fort Sheridan an Indian outpost back in, when was it developed? Do you know anything about Fort Sheridan?
Was Fort Sheridan an Indian outpost?
No.
I don't know. I don't think it was. And I think in the show, I do talk about when and why it was established, but honestly, I don't remember. So the video is right there in that machine, and maybe we can check it afterwards. But I have to confess, I don't remember. I don't remember exactly when it was established or why. Yes?
I believe it was established by the people of Lake Forest who didn't want the commoners from Chicago coming out.
True?
To Lake Forest. Yeah, that's what I heard.
He said he believes it was established by the people of Lake Forest who didn't want the commoners from Chicago coming out. That one I don't believe. But yes?
For our protection.
Didn't Pullman, the man who ran the Pullman trains down in the south side of Chicago,
Pullman.
I think he had something to do with establishing Fort Sheridan, because he wanted to be sure he had an army somewhat, not really near him, you know, too close, but for his purposes.
I just honestly, I don't remember.
Problems.
I do think Fort Sheridan was established at this time when, well, I won't go into it, but the story of the Haymarket, the whole Haymarket affair in Chicago.
That's why they established Fort Sheridan.
Right.
There was also a hotel there right next to it called Hotel Moraine.
They were sure the Moraine Hotel, right?
Yes, but that was that's no longer there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I do believe that Fort Sheridan grew out of this whole fear you know, these
Yeah.
big, powerful captains of industry looked at the Haymarket affair and they thought, whoa, you know, this could get out of hand, and they wanted the Army close by. Yes?
Are you familiar with the story of Antoine Lumet providing shelter for John Kinsey during the Black Hawk Uprising?
Yeah, it was, right. That was, I actually may have misspoke just now in my speech. I'm not sure they were given the land because of helping negotiating the treaty. It may be that it was because Antoine and Archange sheltered John Kinsey and some of the other settlers during the Fort Dearborn, what, you know, in the pre-PC age was called the Fort Dearborn Massacre. It's actually now called the Battle of Fort Dearborn. And it's very interesting how, you know, the winners get to tell the history. Fort Dearborn was at the mouth of the Chicago River in the War of 1812. The Native Americans sided with the French. Captain William Wells, for whom Wells Street is named, came to Chicago from Indiana to lead the residents of Fort Dearborn and the local settlers out of there, to abandon the fort. And as they were moving south along the lakefront, down about where George Pullman's house was, actually, around it's across Lakeshore Drive from the parking lot to Soldier Field now, they saw some Native Americans poking their heads up from behind the dunes, and we don't know if they were just attacked or if they preemptively attacked the Native Americans, but it was a very big battle. Quite a few of the settlers were killed, and a few of the Native Americans were also killed. Yes, sir.
Your research, at least in Wilmette and perhaps Evanston and Wilmette as well, did you come across the fact that there was an interurban branch line that ran east of the Skokie Valley line that I guess paralleled it? It was east of Green Road.
Yeah, that was the first one, the first North Shore line, which I actually think also might have been called the Chicago and Milwaukee. Ran around the loop downtown on the Owl, and then ran up the loop structure to Linden, and then at Linden it became a streetcar, and it ran west on what street? Greenleaf, over to what is now the Green Bay Bicycle Trail, right there adjacent to...
it was parallel.
Right, ran right next to what are the Northwestern tracks, just next to the Northwestern tracks, and you could go all the way up to Milwaukee. Insel bought that, and he didn't think it was a fast enough way to get to Milwaukee. It was, you had to go through city streets, and it was slow. He had he had opera playing in the cars. You know, you could listen to opera. But he wanted a high-speed line, so he built the Skokie Valley branch. So at Howard Street, what is now the Skokie Swift, that was Samuel Insel. It split away from the main branch that went up the North Shore, and he created these high-speed trains called the Electroliners that were these silver trains that were rounded at both ends. And, you know, this will be the last question. Yeah. And that was our last question. And the thing I always like to point out, and I'll close with this, is we had high-speed rail in this country. We had it. We had a great system of high-speed rail in this country.
And I wish it were back.
And it's very interesting that we let it go. And now we're trying to spend billions of dollars to bring it back because it was a good idea. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. As we continue, let our moderator and clerk and elected officials get back up here. Take a breath. And we're going to do our awards now at this point. So don't go away. There's more good stuff here.